wanted to begin tonight's program by saying thank you for coming to Kansas to accept the 2007 Dole Leadership Prize. Senator Dole wanted me to express his personal congratulations and thank you for your service to our country. I also want to say, as a personal matter, it is such a joy to share this stage with one of my personal heroes. So thank you personally from me. One of our slogans at the Dole Institute of Politics is that politics can be an honorable profession. And sometimes when you read the headlines, it doesn't seem that way. But you do your country and your profession honor every day. So thank you. I want to start out, for people who don't know your background and who haven't read your wonderful book, Walking with the Wind, with a little bit about your background and your family. You grew up outside of a tiny town in Alabama, Troy, Alabama, at the height of Jim Crow, and yet you had a very strong family. Can you tell us a little bit about the family you grew up in?
Well, thank you very much. I must say that I'm delighted and very pleased to be here. And to be here to accept this honor, named for Senator Dole, it is, I feel more than lucky. I feel very blessed tonight to be here. And thank you and the Institute for having me here. It is true that I grew up in rural Alabama, 50 miles from Montgomery, outside of a little place called Troy. It is true that my father was a sharecropper, a tenant farmer. But back in 1944, when I was 4 years old, and I do remember when I was 4, my father had saved $300, and with the $300, he bought 110 acres of land. And on this land, there is a lot of cotton and corn, peanuts, hogs, cows, and chickens. I had wonderful parents, wonderful mother and wonderful father, wonderful grandparents and great-grandparents. A lot of first cousins. And I saw segregation, racial discrimination as a young child. You know, my mother used to say that I was nosy because I asked a lot of questions. I wanted to know. I used to eavesdrop. When someone would come and visit her, visit my father, I would go in another room of the house and listen, and I listened well. And the moment they left the house, I would ask them, what was that all about? And she said, boy, that's grown folks talk. And so, but then when I got old enough to go downtown to the little town of Troy, or to Montgomery, or to Tuskegee, I saw those signs that said white men, white women, colored women. And when we would go to the theater, all of us little black children had to go upstairs to the balcony, and all of the little white children went downstairs to the first floor. And I saw segregation. I saw racial discrimination. I tasted the bitter fruits of racism, and I kept saying, why? They would say, that's the way it is. And it would almost sort of hush. Don't ask that.
Right.
And I said, don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way. They were telling me in a sense to be quiet. Don't be so nosy. Don't get involved in other people's business. And I have a friend today who always tell me, say, Congressman, don't get involved in other people's Kool-Aid. So it reminded me, in a sense, of what my mother said. But, you know, as a young person, I was deeply inspired by Rosa Parks and Dr. King. And so I got in trouble. I got in the way. And I got involved in other people's Kool-Aid.
I think a lot of us here are glad you did. You write in this wonderful autobiography a scene that I've now heard you talk about and I've read. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about something that happened when you were still a little boy and you were at your aunt's house and experienced a very frightening storm. And it gives you kind of the metaphor that you open your book with.
Well, Jonathan, I must tell you, I remember what happened like it was yesterday. I was very young. I think I was almost 5. But I was at my Aunt Sneeva's home. There were about 12 or 15 of us young children. We had been playing out in her yard, and an unbelievable storm came up. My Aunt Sneeva lived in what we today would call a shotgun house. And I was trying to make it brief, because I think maybe many people here in Kansas wouldn't know what a shotgun house is.
Not too many of them.
She didn't have a green manicured lawn, had a simple plain dirt yard. And we were out playing in this dirt yard. And a storm came up. And she got us all on the inside. But a shotgun house, an old house, is one way in and one way out. In the nonviolent sense, it was a house where you can bounce a basketball through the front door and it would go straight out the back door. Or in the military sense, it's an old house, maybe with a tin roof, where you can fire a shotgun through the front door and the bullets go straight out the back door. Munson even lived in a shotgun house. And we were out playing in this yard, and the storm came up. The wind started blowing, the thunder started rolling, the lightning started flashing, and the rain started beating on the roof of this old shotgun house. It was a tin roof. And she started crying. She was terrified. She thought the old house was going to blow away. So she got all us little children together and told us to hold hands. And the wind continued to blow, the thunder continued to roll, the lightning continued to flash, and the rain continued to beat on the tin roof of this old shotgun house. And we cried and we cried. And when one corner of this old house appeared to be lifting from its foundation, Mom had us to walk to that corner to try to hold the house down with our little bodies. When the other corner appeared to be lifted, she had us to walk to that side.
And this worked.
And well, I thought it worked then. Okay. And the house didn't blow up. It didn't blow away. And so I tried to make the point in the book, Walking with the Wind, that we were walking with the wind, and we were trying to hold this house down. And that's what the American Civil Rights Movement was all about, trying to hold the American house together. It was saying, in effect, that we all live in the same house. It doesn't matter whether we're black or white or Hispanic or Asian American or Native American, that we're one people, we're one family, we're one house, the American house.
It's a beautiful story, and it opens up this book, and I couldn't stop reading it as soon as I read that. So thank you for sharing that with us. You once said that you felt like you had been lifted up by history. I'm a historian, so I like it when people say that. And yet, I think people here can tell by the way that you communicate, the fluency by which you speak, that you once thought you were going to be a preacher.
Yeah.
And I remember hearing you also tell a story about how you once preached the chickens in the back of your house. You can tell that story if you want, because I love that story. But also, what made you choose, instead of being a preacher, which you were schooled to do, which you seem to have some natural facility with, and become a politician?
I really do feel that I was caught up by what I call the spirit of history. That maybe, just maybe, the spirit of history tracked me down. I remember the first time I met Martin Luther King Jr. A few years later. But, growing up there, I did want to be a minister. I really did. I wanted to preach the gospel. One of my uncles had Santa Claus to bring me a Bible. During those days, when I believed in Santa Claus. And from time to time, with the help of my brothers and sisters and first cousins, we would gather all of our chickens together in the chicken yard, like all these people gather here in this hall. Well, the chickens, along with my brothers and sisters and first cousins, made up the congregation. And I would preach. And when I look back on it, some of those chickens would bow their heads. Some of those chickens would shake their head. They never quite said amen.
Okay.
But I tell you, Jonathan, some of those
audience.
Yeah, but some of those chickens tended to listen to me much better than some of my colleagues listen to me in the Congress. You have two wonderful, gifted Congresspeople from here. They tend to listen. They listen well.
It's the other 432.
Yeah, the others, I tell you, some of those chickens were a little more productive. At least they produce eggs. Okay.
At the very least.
But I really wanted to be a minister, and I think the civil rights movement became part of a larger ministry, of a larger church in a sense. So I still feel like I'm providing some type of service, some type of ministry. And maybe it is not delivering a message, a sermon, but through action.
Yeah.
And so I see my involvement in the civil rights movement, see my involvement in American politics as an extension of my faith.
Which makes perfect sense, but I want to push you a little more, because there are a lot of veterans of the civil rights movement who are religious leaders like the Reverend Jesse Jackson or the Reverend Al Sharpton, or some people stayed in activism like Julian Bond. But you entered electoral politics. It seems, it just seems different for me in some ways that you chose to work within that particular system.
Well, growing up in rural Alabama, I never had an opportunity growing up to visit the state capitol in Montgomery, 50 miles away. But when I went to Washington, not in 1961 on the Freedom Ride, but in 1963, and we had a meeting with President Kennedy in the Oval Office of the White House, and later meeting with leaders of the Congress on both sides of the aisle. And I would go there from time to time with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. I saw the power, the influence, the role that men and women in politics could play. And I think my involvement in the movement kept saying that there is a role, that you can play a major role in bringing about change through American politics. You know, I admire President Kennedy. I admire Robert Kennedy. And I got to know President Johnson. And I wanted to find a way to be involved. And after Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated, after Robert Kennedy was assassinated, I felt like I had a mission. It was almost a calling to try to pick up where they left off. But these two men, I loved and I admired them.
Yeah. You mentioned meeting Martin Luther King Jr. for the first time. I know you've talked about wanting to enter into the movement after you heard him speak on your radio during a gospel show. What was it like to meet him for the first time in the flesh?
The first time I met Martin Luther King Jr., I just briefly tell you, I wanted to attend a little college about 10 miles from my home. It was called Troy State College. It's not Troy University. I submitted my application, my high school transcript. I never heard a word from the school. Not one word, because they knew I had graduated, I guess, from a black high school. So I never heard a word from them. So I didn't tell any of my teachers. I didn't tell my mother or my father, any of my sisters or brothers. On my own, I wrote a letter to Dr. King. Told him I needed his help. I needed his support. He wrote me back.
Did you expect to hear back from him when you wrote this letter?
Well, I think I did, because, I think I did.
I can write a lot of people letters. I don't know if I'm going to get one back.
But he wrote me back.
Okay.
And he knew from my letter that I was a poor child in rural Alabama, Pike County, Troy. And I guess he was saying to himself, "Is anything good come out of Troy, Alabama?" So he wrote me back and sent me a round-trip Greyhound bus ticket and invited me to come to Montgomery to see him. In the meantime, I'd been accepted at a little school in Nashville. And an uncle of mine gave me a $100 bill, more money than I ever had, gave me a Foot Locker. I put my clothing, my books, everything I owned in that Foot Locker in September 1957, 50 years ago. Everything that I owned except those chickens.
Your flock.
And went off to school to Nashville. And after being in Nashville for about 2 weeks, I told one of my teachers that I'd been in contact with Martin Luther King Jr. And this particular teacher knew Dr. King. They both had attended the same college in Atlanta. So he informed Martin Luther King Jr. that I was in Nashville. Dr. King got back in church and suggested when I was home for spring break to come and see him. So in March of 1958, on a Saturday morning, by this time I'm 18 years old, my father drove me to the Greyhound bus station. I boarded a bus. I traveled the 50 miles from Troy to Montgomery. A young African-American lawyer met me at the Greyhound bus station. I'd never seen a lawyer before. This young man was a lawyer for Rosa Parks and for Dr. King. He drove me to the First Baptist Church in downtown Montgomery, pastored by Reverend Ralph Abernathy, a colleague of Dr. King in the movement. I was so scared, I didn't know what to say or what to do. And ushered me into the pastor's study, the office of the church. I saw Martin Luther King Jr. and Ralph Abernathy standing behind a desk. And Dr. King said, "Are you the boy from Troy? Are you John Lewis?"
You do that voice really well.
And I spoke up and said, "Dr. King, I am John Robert Lewis." I gave my whole name. And so that was the beginning of my involvement with Martin Luther King Jr. And that day changed my life forever.
And he was a mentor to you for the next
forever.
10 years, yeah.
We became friends. I didn't pursue my going to Troy State. My folks were so afraid that our home would be bombed or burned, or we would lose the land. So I continued to study in Nashville. And it was in Nashville that Dr. King would come and speak from time to time at meetings, and I would see him. Then I started attending these nonviolent workshops, studying what Gandhi attempted to do in South Africa, what he accomplished in India, studying Thoreau and civil disobedience, studying the great religions of the world, studying the way of passive resistance, the way of nonviolence.
Okay. Well, I want to get to that in a minute, because reading something in a book is one thing, but you actually lived what you read in Thoreau and in Gandhi. But I want to talk for a second about a generational shift in the civil rights movement, because when we teach about the civil rights movement, someone like me can talk a lot about Thurgood Marshall working through the legal system to desegregate schools and integrate America. We can talk about A. Philip Randolph, who worked for black workers. We can talk about Dr. King, who kind of brought a new type of nonviolence to the movement in the Montgomery bus boycott. But while you were in college in Nashville, you were part of a vanguard of a new type of strategy, and that's the sit-in movement. How did sit-ins, which were predominantly practiced by college students, young people, change the civil rights movement?
The sit-in movement of the late 50s and early 60s, we had what we call test sit-ins in downtown Nashville in the fall and winter of 1959. And then when the students,
before the famous ones in Greensboro, North Carolina.
Before February the 1st. And when the students in Greensboro started on February the 1st, sitting in on a regular basis, then we started sitting in. And we had what we call T-days, Tuesday and Thursday and Saturday. We thought it was like class days, and we could...
cut class.
Well, you try to get as many students as possible to participate. So, there would be few students in class. And people would come prepared to sit all day. I remember sitting down at a lunch counter, reading a book, working on a paper, or just sitting there waiting to be served. And we did the little do's and don'ts.
Yeah.
Don't talk out. Don't laugh out. Sit up straight. Don't talk back. Obey your leaders. And near the end of the do's and don'ts, it said, remember the teaching of Thoreau, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. May God bless you. In the day of the first mass arrest, it was February 27, 1960, and every student that got arrested had a copy of the do's and don'ts on them. And the local paper, the Nashville Tennessean, in Nashville, reprinted the do's and don'ts.
Oh, in the paper.
In the paper. But would you be sitting there in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, waiting to be served, and someone would come up and spit on you, or put a lighted cigarette out in your hair or down your back, pull you off the lunch counter stool, start beating you, and you just sit there and not strike back. And one day, we were told if we go down on this day, we'd probably be beaten, and later we would be arrested. That's exactly what happened. And the day that I was arrested, I was told as a child, don't get in trouble. Don't get in the way.
Right. And
you couldn't get in trouble with the law. And we were sitting there, we were orderly, we were peaceful. We were not disorderly. Right. We believed in nonviolence. And some of us have grown to the point to accept nonviolence as a way of life, as a way of living. And when we were arrested in jail the first time, I felt so free. I felt so liberated. I felt like I had crossed over.
This explains why when I showed Congressman Lewis a picture in David Halberstam's book about the civil rights movement, picture of Congressman Lewis getting let off to jail, he remarked in the kind of way I would say, oh, that's me when I got my bar mitzvah, or that's me on my 21st birthday, saying, oh, that's me getting taken off to jail. In the good way.
Well, it was my first arrest.
Okay.
And I had on a relative, during those days, when we went out to protest, we dressed up. We put on suits and ties, and we wanted to show the contrast. Right. And I had on my new suit. And, if I'm going to be arrested and go to jail today, I wanted to look my best.
That's right. That's good. You were one of 10 people to speak at the Great March on Washington in August of 1963. Obviously, we have all these pictures in our mind of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., the final speaker that day. Sometimes I regret that in the way we teach the civil rights movement, we kind of reduce it down to that one speech, which is a great speech, but there was a lot more to Martin Luther King. But I recently read your speech that day. You mentioned that you admired President Kennedy, but you were pretty hard on Kennedy in that speech you gave that day. You were very hard on liberals in the Kennedy administration and in Congress. You came off, to me, as someone who was far more, I don't want to say radical, because you're not talking about black power. But you're talking about things, pushing things faster than Ralph Abernathy and Martin Luther King and people in the SCLC wanted to go. Is that fair?
Well, I think it's a pretty fair analysis, but when I look back on the words that I had in that original text,
they're really radical.
No, but today, in today's language, in today's society, I think it would be mild.
Yes.
But I said, you know, the March on Washington of August 28, 1963 was not to support a particular piece of civil rights legislation. It was a march for jobs and freedom. And in the original text, I said, we cannot in good conscience support the administration proposed civil rights bill, for it was too little and too late. And then, I tell you, when I was working on this speech, I was reading a copy of the New York Times, and I saw a group of black women in Southern Africa carrying signs saying, "One man, one vote." And so in my proposed speech, I said something like, "One man, one vote is the African cry. It is ours too. It must be ours." And that became the rallying cry for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. See, President Kennedy took the position that if a person had a 6th grade education, he should be considered literate, and he should be able to register to vote. Those of us in SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, said the only qualification for being able to register to vote should be that of age and resident. And then another part of the speech, down in the body of the speech, I said, you tell us to wait. You tell us to be patient. We cannot wait. We cannot be patient. We want our freedom, and we want it now. And then another line or two in the speech, I said, we are not involved in a serious revolution. The black masses are restless. And some people objected to the use of the word revolution, to the use of the word masses and saying black masses. And A. Philip Randolph came to my rescue in his baritone voice. He said, there's nothing wrong with the use of the word revolution. There's nothing wrong with the use of the word masses. I use it myself sometimes. So that stayed in the speech. But what people didn't like, near the end of the speech, now you must keep in mind, we all had to prepare a speech and make it available to the rest of the group. And the night before the March on Washington, the text of my speech got out, and it was the Archbishop of the Diocese of Washington who was going to object to my speech. So some people think that was individual within the Kennedy administration. He was supposed to give an invocation. He was not going to give him an invocation if I didn't change the speech. So near the end of the speech, I said something like, if we do not see meaningful progress here today, the day will come when we will not confine our marching on Washington, but we may be forced to march to the South the way Sherman did, nonviolently. He said, that's too far. You're going a little too far. That's inflammatory. So at one point...
Literally inflammatory.
Yeah, they said it was a little inflammatory. So after the program started, the music was going. We met I guess that's to the right of Mr. Lincoln, and Dr. King was saying to me, John, that didn't sound like you. And Mr. Randolph was saying, John, we came this far together for the sake of unity. Let's stay together. And I couldn't say no to Dr. King. I couldn't say no to Philip Randolph. And we changed those words and just said we will march through 7 cities in a nonviolent.
Not like Sherman.
Not like Sherman. We dropped the reference to Sherman.
All right, so I wasn't going to ask about Dr. King's speech, but when you read his speech beforehand, did you say, wow, he hit that one out of the park, this is going to be famous 60 years from now, 100 years from now?
No. But when I look back on it, and each time I hear the speech, when I hear, go to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, and
where the place he spoke is marked off.
Well, it's marked there. It's inscription in the steps, and it's simply saying, "I have a dream." Martin Luther King Jr., August 28, 1963. But I think that day, Dr. King transformed those steps, those marble steps, into a modern-day pulpit. He spoke from his soul. He spoke from his gut. And he knew he was speaking. Okay. He was feeling good, too. And there was people sort of urging him on. And I think Mahalia Jackson was back in the back saying, tell him about your dream. Tell him about your dream. And he got into it. And,
is that right? And she was,
oh, yeah. Okay. And he really and he went for it.
This is the part I really have been dreading all day. But I want to ask you about what happened on the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge in 1965. Do you remember what happened to you that day, or have you had to cobble together memories from other people's accounts? Do you remember being attacked by the Alabama State Troopers as you tried to march peacefully across that bridge?
I remember very well of us, 600 of us, walking in twos in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion from a little church called Brown Chapel AME Church, slowly. We had conducted a nonviolent workshop. Right. We had a prayer. We had a song. And we lined up in twos. I was wearing a backpack before it became fashionable to wear backpacks.
I even know what you had in that backpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I thought we were going to be arrested and that we were going to go to jail. And I had my little backpack. I had on my trench coat. We got to the edge of the bridge, crossing the Alabama River. You saw all of this water down below. And a young man walking beside me, named Jose Williams from Dr. King's organization, said, "John, can you swim?" I said, "No." And I said, "Jose, can you swim?" He said, "A little." And I said, "Well, there's too much water down there. We're not going to jump. We're not going back. We're going forward." And we continued to walk. And we came to the highest point on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, crossing the Alabama River. Down below, we saw a sea of blue, Alabama State Troopers. And we continued to walk, and we came within hearing distance of the state troopers. And the man identified himself and said, "I'm Major John Cloud of the Alabama State Troopers. This is an unlawful march. It will not be allowed to continue. I gave you 3 minutes to disperse and return to your church." And Jose said, "Major, give us a moment to kneel and pray." In less than a minute or so, the major said, "Troopers advance." And you saw these guys putting on their gas masks. They came toward us, beating us with nightsticks and bullwhips, trampling us with horses, and releasing the tear gas. I remember being hit in the head by a state trooper with a nightstick. And I remember my legs just giving out. And it seemed like I was spinning, it became just dark. And I sort of said to myself, this is it.
That's it.
This is it, that I'm going to die here on this bridge. And I was very concerned about the people behind us. I don't recall, 42 years later, I made it back across that bridge through the streets of Selma, back to this little church that we left from. But that Sunday afternoon, I do recall being in the church. The church is full to capacity. More than 2,000 people on that side trying to get in to protest what had happened. And someone asked me to say something to the audience. And I stood up and said something like...
With your skull fractured.
Yeah. I was well enough to stand up, and the only thing I said, I remember standing up saying something like, "I don't understand it. I don't understand it. How President Johnson can send troops to Vietnam and cannot send troops to Selma, Alabama, to protect people who only desires to register and vote." The next thing I knew, I had been admitted to a local Good Samaritan hospital in Selma, where I stayed that Sunday night.
Was this a blacks-only hospital?
Yeah, it was operated by the Catholic Church with a mission. There was, matter of fact, sisters from Kansas, from Missouri, from Kansas, that came down a few days later. I stayed in that night, and early that Monday morning, Dr. King and Reverend Abernathy came by to visit me in my hospital room and said, "Don't worry, John, we'll make it from Selma to Montgomery, and the Voting Rights Act will be passed."
He was right.
That was right. Dr. King was right. Because of what happened on that Sunday became known as Bloody Sunday.
Yeah, it really did galvanize it.
It changed America, really. There was a sense of righteous indignation.
Yeah.
2 days later, there was demonstration in more than 80 cities in America.
I know President Johnson watched that very night on the news what happened to you.
President Johnson, I talked with him about it later. He was very disturbed about it. He said people were singing "We Shall Overcome" all over the place. At the White House, the Department of Justice says his daughter can sleep for listening to "We Shall Overcome." But President Johnson...
It's the nicest thing they were singing.
But he was so moved, he tried to get Governor Wallace to say that he would protect us if we decided to march again. And Governor Wallace could not assure the president. So on March 15, 1965, Lyndon Johnson, in my estimation, made one of the most moving civil rights, voting rights speeches that any American president and made in modern time. And I love what he said, and I paraphrase what he said. He started that speech off on March 15 by saying, "I speak tonight for the dignity of man and for the destiny of democracy."
And he finishes by saying, "And we shall overcome."
And we shall overcome. As he introduced the Voting Rights Act.
Yeah. The very line that he said was keeping his family up at night.
Right. And he said, "And we shall overcome." I was sitting next to Martin Luther King Jr. in the home of a local family as we listened to Lyndon Johnson speak to the joint session of the Congress and speak to the nation. And when he said, "And we shall overcome," I looked at Dr. King. He cried. Tears came down his face, and we all cried to hear the President of the United States say, "And we shall overcome." And he introduced the Voting Rights Act. The Congress debated the Voting Rights Act. But in the meantime, he called out part of the United States military to protect us on that march for 5 days. And when we made it to Montgomery, there were more than 30,000 Americans, black and white. And they heard another wonderful speech from Dr. King that day.
Wow. There's a cover story of the Washington magazine, The New Republic, published about 10 years ago now, that calls you the last integrationist. Has integration gone out of style? Are you the last integrationist?
Well, I like to think that I'm not the last. I like to think that I'm not the last integrationist. I like to believe and to think that as a society, there's hundreds and thousands and millions of Americans that believe that we must have an integrated society. We must make it work. We must make it work in America. We must come to that point where we lay down the burden of race and create a truly interracial democracy. That's what the struggle was all about. I think it's the only way that we're going to fulfill the dreams of Dr. King and create a more perfect union, really. We have to do it, and not just for ourselves, but for generations yet unborn. You know, we all live together in this little house. And as Dr. King said, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters, that we will perish as fools. If we can make it work in America, maybe we can have a lesson and example for the rest of the world.
Yeah. To get back to politics, you very early on worked for Robert F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. As a matter of fact, when you told me when you started working, I didn't know that Bobby was running back in the fall of '67, really. What attracted you to him as a presidential candidate during those very tumultuous years after you left SNCC?
Well, I got to know Robert Kennedy. I didn't. Sometimes we had to call him and suggest that he move a little faster, that he do 1, 2, 3 or ABC. And one day, even when I was chair of SNCC, even before the March on Washington, it was July the 22nd, 1963. There was a series of protests in Cambridge, Maryland, the Eastern Shore of Maryland, and he called a group of us in, and we took a break from the meeting that we had with the local officials in Cambridge, state officials, and the people in the movement. And he called me to the side and he said, "John, I now understand the young people, the students have educated me." And you can see the changes taking place in this man. And after the assassination of his brother, you can see what was happening. And when he announced that he was running, made it official, I was in Jackson, Mississippi for a meeting. I sent him a telegram and told him I wanted to help. What can I do? So I took a leave from my job, and they asked me to go to Indianapolis, Indiana, to organize rallies, meetings to get people registered to vote. And I went there, and I was working with some of his staff people.
Yeah. That was the day.
And
April 4th.
April 4th, I was there to bring together a mass rally of blacks and whites in a sort of a transitional neighborhood. And we heard that Dr. King had been shot, but we didn't know his condition. And there was some debate whether Robert Kennedy should come and speak.
Sure.
And some of us said he had to come. We organized this group, and he came and spoke. He was in another part of Indiana.
It's his finest hour, that speech. If you ask me, anyway.
To me, it was one of the best political speeches. It was not such a political speech. It was just a speech from the heart, from the soul. And it was Robert Kennedy that announced to this crowd.
Right, and you hear them gasp.
When he said, I have some turbulent news tonight. Martin Luther King Jr. had been assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. And a lot of people in the audience heard it
For the first time.
And people didn't know what to do. He went on and spoke, talked about his brother.
Right. Also shot by a white man, he says.
That's right. And urged people not to engage in violence. And in Annapolis, you didn't have any violence.
Because of that speech, you think?
Well, I think it had a great deal to do with that he had the capacity, he had the ability to tame that audience.
That is why he's one of my heroes as well. I mean, here's a speech where he quotes the ancient poet Aeschylus to an angry crowd.
I know.
And it somehow worked.
He had the power to do it. And I tell you, I said tonight, I'm convinced that if Robert Kennedy had lived, he probably would have been elected president. Our country and maybe our world would be a better place. After Dr. King was assassinated, I dropped out of the campaign. I went back to Atlanta and worked. I had prepared for his funeral. Then I got back on the campaign trail. And I went to Oregon. He lost that primary. I think it was May 15th, 1968. Then we went to California.
Yeah, you were in Los Angeles.
I was in L.A. and working, and I teamed up with Cesar Chavez. And we went to, and there was a whole campaign between Humphrey and Eugene McCarthy, and we were trying to convince people they should support Robert Kennedy. And I remember going to he invited a group of us to his suite that night, the 5th floor Ambassador Hotel. And he joked with me. He said, John, you let me down today. He said, more Mexican American turn out than Negroes. That's what he said. And he was just joking. And I said, we did the best we could. We tried to get people out. We did the best we could. And he said, why don't you remain here? I'm going to go down and make my victory statement.
Oh.
And he went down, and we were there with Theo White, his sister Jean Kennedy Smith, Jack Newfield from the Village Voice, and Medgar Everett's brother, Charlie Everett. And we saw it all on television. And that evening, I just wanted to leave L.A. I just wanted to get out, just go home to Atlanta. And the next day, I got on a flight and flew home. And I think I cried all the way from Los Angeles to Atlanta. It was a long flight. And after Bobby died, and they had the services at St. Patrick, I was invited to be I guess you call it honor guard, and invited to ride the funeral train from New York to Washington. And I didn't want the train to stop, but I knew it was.
I share your supposition that things would have been very different.
I think something I really believe is with the assassination of President Kennedy, Martin Luther King Jr., and Robert Kennedy, I think something died in America. And I'm not so sure as a nation and as a people, or those of us who lived through that period, whether we completely recovered from it.
I want to get to the question and answer from the audience, but I want to talk a little bit about the current campaign, because the two leading candidates for the Democratic presidential nomination, I think it's fair to say, have both avidly sought your endorsement. It means something to both of them. And then last Friday, you came out and endorsed Hillary Clinton for president. Was that a difficult decision for you? Because I know Senator Obama made his case pretty hard to you.
Well, I like Senator Obama. I like Senator Clinton. I like President Clinton. They're all good friends. But there comes a time you have to decide. You have to make a decision. You have to have an executive session with yourself. And you said, Steph, just talk to yourself for a moment. Just don't talk back to yourself.
Then you're crazy.
That's right. Yeah. And when I turned 60 in I guess 2000, President Clinton came down for my 60th birthday celebration. And when I turned 65, 2 years ago, Senator Obama came down and spoke. So I've known the Clinton for a long time, long before President Clinton became president. I'm very loyal to my friends. I don't forget my friends. I've known Hillary Clinton, President Clinton. Mrs. Clinton is so smart. It's not to take anything from Mr. Obama. President Clinton is smart. He is very smart, gifted. But I think Hillary Clinton is much smarter.
But just to go back, you know, you've worked your entire life for civil rights, for black freedom. We have a pretty good chance to have a black nominee in one of the two major parties.
Mr. Obama get the nomination?
Yeah.
I will go out and campaign all over America for him.
I think a lot of people here might join you.
Yeah, we campaign all over America for him. But I think in American politics, we got to deal with politics that transcend the issue of race. Yeah. But we, you know, in America right now, we have the luxury, on the Democratic side at least, to have an unbelievable group of candidates, just wonderful people. To have a woman who's doing very well, to have an African American who's doing well, have a Hispanic that is doing well. Bill Richardson, I served in the House with him, and to have several other candidates.
Right.
So, you know, you can vote, you can't lose for voting with any of these guys. You're not voting against anybody.
Right,
You're voting for somebody.
I do want to mention some things that are going on in our country right now that a lot of people here find very disturbing. That's what's going on sometimes down in Louisiana, what they call the Gina 6. We have kind of that old Jim Crow style terror, racism right there on our television screens again. I know there's some things happening right in your district where the young man who was put in jail for, I think, a 10-year sentence for consensual sex with his girlfriend while 17 years old. Are we backsliding? Do we need to reinvigorate our struggle for equal rights?
Well, I think something is happening in America.
Nooses, you know,
we see
outside people's
hate
offices.
crimes, and we see miscarriage of justice, whether it's in Louisiana, in Georgia, or some other places. I think when we see something, we have to speak up. We have to speak out. We have to get in the way and continue to fight to bring about changes. There's so many of our young people, and they're not just African American, but others are becoming victimized by the criminal justice system. We have to do better to reform the system, and so that's a different way. There's a better way. But it's good to see the young people reacting, to see the college students.
Right.
And I think we're going to see some changes in this area.
Okay. It is my belief, and I talk to people who are in college Republicans and young Democrats and people in my classes, there is a very palpable sense right now, in 2007, that young people want to be called to do something. How can they do it? What can they do?
Well, I would say to young people, and especially students, you don't have to be called a challenge by congressional leaders or by the President of the United States.
It could help.
It would help. It would help to have the President to call upon the American people, all of us, not just young people, not just students, but to call upon the nation to do something, to sacrifice. We're not being called upon to do anything. The only people that are sacrificing right now are young men and our young women in harm's way in Afghanistan, in Iraq. The rest of us, you know, we have it pretty well, you know. We're doing pretty well. But short of that, being challenged by leaders, then we have to get out there and just do it. I think we all have an obligation, a mission, to give something back, to do something, not to be still. We have to move our feet, and we have to be prepared to walk with the wind. Just get out there and push and pull. You cannot be quiet. You cannot sit still. You have to be in the arena doing something.
Did you guys hear that? Write it down. We're going to take some questions from the audience, starting over here.
I've followed you ever since the March on Washington, and I've never been disappointed. But today I wonder when you mentioned the American dream, which was mentioned as you were being introduced, how do you define the American dream to the residents in the Bronx and to the growing millions of homeless and hungry in this country?
Well, for hundreds and thousands and millions of our citizens, the dream is not yet fulfilled. It's a shame and a disgrace that we live in a country with so much wealth, so many resources, and we have too many people that have been left out and left behind. When it comes to housing, come to just enough food and healthy food. In addition, we have more than 40 million of our citizens without health insurance. I happen to believe that health care is a right. It's not a privilege. And the quality of a person's health care shouldn't be judged by the size of that person's wallet, a bank account, or the zip code that person lives in. And we live in a democratic society. We live in a democracy. And if we believe that, then we have to make it happen. We have to say to our elected officials, to members of Congress, to the President of the United States, this is what we want, this is what we need, and this is what we're going to get. It doesn't matter whether you're a PhD or no degree. We all have one vote. And we have to use that vote as the most powerful nonviolent weapon or tool we have. And we got to get enough people mobilized and upset enough to make it happen.
Good evening. My name is Alvin Sykes. I'm president of the Emmett Till Justice Campaign from here in Kansas City. During the 60s, the 50s, and the early 70s, there were countless unsolved civil rights era murders that occurred throughout the South and throughout America as the struggle for civil rights that you were a leader in moved forward. June 12th of this year, the House of Representatives passed your bill, the Emmett Till Unsolved Civil Rights Crime Act, along with co-sponsored by Dennis Moore here in Kansas City, Kansas, and it's pending in the House. As we pursued this bill, countless people would come up to us and say, why are you trying to reopen these old cases? Why don't you leave things like they were? Could you respond as to why, as the chief sponsor of this bill, why we should go after any of the unsolved civil rights era murders?
Well, I think it's important, not just for the sake of history, but that we solve these cases. I think all of the dirt, all of the filth must come out so we can deal with it. So there will be some sense of justice and some closure. I knew the 3 young men that were killed in Mississippi in 1964. I met them. I knew one much better than the other 2. But Andy Goodman, Micah Scherner, and James Chaney, these 3 young Americans, on June 21st, 1964, were just engaged in efforts to get people registered to vote. They went out to investigate the burning of an African-American church. They were stopped by the sheriff, taken to jail. Later, the sheriff and his deputy turned them over to the Klan, where they were beaten, shot, and killed. And I said to young people all the time, these 3 young men didn't die in Vietnam. They didn't die in the Middle East. They didn't die in Africa and in Eastern Europe. They died right here in our own country. I don't think we have the full story of what happened to them. And there are countless other civil rights murders that took place in the heart of the Deep South. And we passed the bill in the House. And now is still in the Senate, and one member of the Senate will put a hold on it. If it could come for a full vote, the Senate would pass it, and hope for the President will sign it into law. And we would have the resources, the money, put in within the Department of Justice, special unit, to do the necessary investigation to bring closure on these cases. And I think it will lead to greater reconciliation in our country.
Thank you. Sir?
I was wondering what thoughts you have about what's happened to America's moral authority in the world, what we might do to try to restore that, and also if you have any thoughts regarding how the U.S. might work with the UN to be more effective in dealing with some of the foreign situations that we're in.
Well, from time to time, I have an opportunity, like many members of Congress, to travel. And I would tell you, after 9/11, there was such goodwill toward America, such goodwill all over the world. And sometimes when I travel, people ask me whether we had lost our way as a nation and as a people. It's my hope and my prayer that one of the first things the next president should do or must do is to rebuild a moral authority, a moral standing in the world. That is going to be a tough job to do, but someone of stature must go out there and try to rebuild this sense that we care, that we can be a good citizen among the community of nations, that people are not really concerned about our bombs, our missiles, and our guns. They're more concerned about our ideas, what we stand for. You know, in this country, when you go and talk about in America, during the past 50 years or so, in the civil rights movement, we witnessed a nonviolent revolution, a revolution of values, a revolution of ideas. And we did it, for the most part, with some order and under the rule of law. That we had a right to dissent, a right to protest. We had a right to petition our government. We had freedom of assembly. These are ideas that we have to share with the rest of the world. These ideas that we have to share to get other people to want to create democratic societies. So I'm deeply concerned about our standing in the world today. That's why I think we got to get more and more young people to travel, to become part of Peace Corps, and get more and more people from other parts of the world to come and visit America, to attend our colleges and our universities, get more people to leave America and go and study abroad. And we share our ideas, our culture, our history, and I think we have a great deal in common with the rest of the world.
Last question.
I just wanted to ask you how you feel the really unique struggle that you faced within the civil rights movement, how now as a policymaker for the nation, how that really impacts how you would see the world of politics today, especially with the situations such as in Georgia that maybe parallel what you saw in the 1960s.
Well, you know, I don't think I changed that much in terms of my philosophy, my attitude. I think my involvement in the civil rights movement has made me a much better human being, maybe not a better politician, but because of my involvement in the movement, every now and then, every so often, I feel like standing up sometime and saying in another period, another time, maybe another place, we did it like this. We said this. And I would say to myself, you know, if this was 1965 or 1964, we wouldn't take this. We just wouldn't take it. You know, every now and then I feel like going down to the White House and just say, Mr. President, listen, you know better. You know better. I give you an example. There was a certain president, I won't call his name, I get in trouble, but there was a certain president who called me one evening at home in Washington, and he had called the office on several occasions, called his house, and I heard him on my recording, so I didn't answer. And so one day he got me to come down to the White House, and he said, "John, when did you get my call?" I said, "A few days ago, Mr. President." He said, "Why didn't you return my call?" I said, "Mr. President, I didn't want to talk to you." And I said, "I know what you wanted. You wanted me to vote for a rule to get your crime bill through, but your bill had the death penalty in it, had more death penalty, and I didn't want to vote for it. And eventually, I voted for the rule, but when the bill got on the floor, I voted against the bill." So part of that is my movement experience. And sometimes when I'm sitting on the floor of the House before a vote or in a committee, I often say to myself, what would so-and-so do? What would Dr. King say? What would Gandhi say? Sometimes we have to step out of the box and do something extra to dramatize the issue. People used to ask me during the sit-ins of the Freedom Ride, "What should we do, John?" And I would say in my own quiet way, people don't think I'm quiet, but I'm very quiet. I would say things like, we need to find a way to dramatize the issue. Put a face on it. Make it real. And somehow in America, maybe during the next election, we need to make it real. We've got to dramatize it. We've got to get everybody to get registered, get young people, especially college students and high school students that are old enough, but everybody, all of us, got to get out and vote like we never voted before. It doesn't matter. We just got to get out there and participate. I happen to believe that the vote is the most powerful, as I said before, instrument that we have in a democratic society. It's almost sacred. It is precious. And we have to use it and use it for good.